Hey, thanks for watching my video. This is going to be part 2 of the Ducati SS tire removal install. This is going to be the install side of it. So what we're looking at right now is the rear wheel of a 800 SS. I'm holding the carrier in my hand. I did scrub out the cush drive. This bike sat for a long time, so there was some corrosion inside the cush drive, and there's absolutely corrosion on each one of these little studs that slide down into the cush drive. So I'm just taking some steel wool, and I'm just making sure that these little posts are clean and free of any debris. This cush drive, or this sprocket carrier, needs to slide in and out of the cush drive as you go down the highway. Just a feature to keep the bike from rattling and clanging and clacking as you're riding it. So I'm just going to polish up each one of these studs, and once they all feel good, then I'm going to put a light coat of grease on them. So this is kind of a messy job, and all I did was spray these down with a little bit of WD-40. And again, this is only the only reason I really have to do this is because this bike sat for so long. If this bike was a rider and somebody was out riding it, once a week, couple times a month, tires were changed regularly, this wouldn't be an issue, because every time the tires were changed, these little posts would get a light coat of grease, and they would look just like they did when they came out of the factory. So I'm going to wipe each one of these clean with the paper towel and get all that debris off there. And in that little tub you see down at the bottom, that is Lubrimatic marine grease. It is marine grease for lubrication and corrosion. This stuff is great in any kind of condition that you're going to see where there's water and moisture. Motorcycle. Why put a high dollar lubricant on these parts just so you can go get stuck in a rainstorm and that lubricant wash off? The marine grease isn't going to do that. So I just put a light coat on each one of these posts, and then I'll just drop it down into the wheel. So it goes in a lot easier than it came out. It was pretty well corroded. Now I'm going to remove the nuts on the studs that hold the sprocket on. So even though the sprockets are good on this bike, I'm going to replace sprockets and chain. The chain was rusty from sitting outside for so long. The countershaft sprocket was pretty rusty. If you watch that video, you'll see where I had to soak the retaining clip for the countershaft sprocket with WD-40 before I could get it to pop off the sprocket. I'm fortunate that I built a Monster 750 a couple years ago, and I bought a chain and sprocket kit from Sprocketcenter.com for that bike, and when I sold that bike, I didn't sell the sprocket kit with it, so I have AFAM super light kit for it. Stock gearing on this bike is 15 in the front and 40 teeth on the rear. The kit for the Ducati was 15. I believe the Ducati 750 was 1541, and I took it up to 1544. So when I get done with this 800 SS, it's going to have a pretty good hole shot. I should be able to keep up pretty well with the leader bike just with the gearing. As long as we're in the twisties running through the mountains, I should have no problem keeping up with them with the 44 tooth rear sprocket. And I love these AFAM super light sprockets. They're as light as an aluminum sprocket, but they're strong. because they are steel. So if you're thinking about buying an alloy sprocket to save weight, you know, just forget about that. Go ahead and get yourself a steel Superlight kit. I am not a fan of the 520 kit. That's what this one is. I almost always try to get a 530 kit, and I look for a chain that has the tensile strength for a 1000 cc or a 1400 cc motorcycle. You'll get more life out of that than you will out of a 520 with maybe a 1000 cc rating on it. The problem is, it just when you're beating on the chain and sprockets, they're just going to wear out. And if it's $200 for chain and sprockets, isn't that $200 you'd rather spend on something else? So what I'm doing is I'm kind of going around in a star pattern, and I'm tightening up all of these nuts. So at this step, don't tighten down these nuts as tight as you can possibly get them. Just snug them up, just firm. I'm only doing maybe 10 to 15 foot-pounds. Not really a lot of torque I'm putting on this wrench. So they're all tightened down. Now I'm going to get my torque wrench, and I'm going to torque each one of these. So if you've watched any of my other videos, I never ever give out torque specs. You need to go to your service manual or go online to somebody you trust and get your torque specs. The torque specs of this 2007 800SS might not be the same as your bike or your 1000 SS. If you're watching this, this is the same procedure that you would do if you were doing a Monster. So a Monster 900 may not have the same torque specs as this 800cc. So I won't be giving you torque specs today or ever. So now we've got all of them torqued down. We're good to go. We're ready to roll the wheel under the bike. Put it up underneath there. And then let's go ahead and grab our axle. And that is a Pirelli Diablo Corsa 2 that I put on the back. The 170 size tires are really getting hard to find nowadays. So I sprayed this axle down with a little WD-40, and I just took some steel wool to scrub the crud off of it. And you can see just from this axle that this bike hasn't gotten much use over the years. So it's pretty clean. Now I'm going to take a coat of that marine grease, and I'm going to put it on the axle. Now remember, we don't grease the axle for lubrication. That's not what we're doing here, or on any motorcycle for that matter. Motorcycle wheels have bearings. The wheels turn on the bearings. The only reason we're putting grease on the axle is to make the axle slide in and out of the wheel easier for the next time you have to tear this bike apart. Alright, so let's line this wheel up, and we need to put the caliper on. This caliper is really difficult, the way it's set up with the little post that sticks off of the inside of the swing arm. There's a slide that the caliper mount has to fit into, and it's, like I said, you just saw me fighting with it. It is kind of a pain in the butt to do, but you'll get it. It's easier than dismounting the caliper and putting the caliper on later. So now we got the axle through. We want to push the wheel all the way up, because remember, we're going to put a new chain on. So when you're looking down at your swing arm, you have notches in your swing arm. On this bike, it's pretty nice because those notches are right on top of the swing arm. On a lot of motorcycles, those notches are down on the side by the axle. This bike has an arrow that actually points to the notch on the swing arm, and I'll show you that later. But because we did go up on the rear sprocket size, we're going to have to cut the chain to fit this setup. So what I need to do is back out these chain adjusters so I can slide the axle as far up into the swing arm as I can possibly get it. Because again, I want longevity. I want to be able to ride this thing until the chain's all the way back to the back of the swing arm. Typically for me though, that doesn't happen. Usually I'm about halfway through the notches and I'm out riding in the mountains and I can hear that chain clicking and banging underneath me. So instead of listening to the chain, a worn out chain, I just go ahead and replace the chain. But I can typically get about 20,000 miles out of a chain and sprockets. So if I'm doing that, you probably should be able to get the same out of it if you're riding your bike pretty hard. So I'm still fighting with this rear wheel, getting it to go forward. And like most bikes, the chain tensioners, they just keep falling back down and just, it's a pain in the butt. So I've got it so where the wheel's pretty much all the way up. I'm going to go ahead and put the washer and the nut on just to tighten it down a little bit so the wheel stays in one place while I install the chain. So I tightened down that 22 millimeter nut, and now let's go ahead and put our front sprocket on. The front sprocket just slides on that spline. You'll find out for yourself, the aftermarket sprockets never just fit smoothly like an OEM sprocket. That's alright. You wiggle it around a little bit and it'll slide right on. The OEM sprockets usually fit like a glove on these. Tap it. I just had to tap it back into place so I could get the front spline to show, and you'll see what I'm talking about when you're doing yours. There's a front spline, then there's a little gap, and then there's the rear spline. So you want to get your retainer over the front spline, and then it twists in that little gap. Your retainer is going to twist maybe 1/8 of an inch, so you can get the 8 millimeter screws into your countershaft sprocket, and that's what holds your sprocket on. Ducati has one of the best sprocket mounting systems there is. I'm not a big fan of countershaft sprockets with a big bolt right in the middle of the countershaft. Sometimes I'll get a bike in here and that bolt on the holding the countershaft sprocket on will be on there so tight that my impact won't even loosen it up. So I appreciate any motorcycle company that can do a setup like this where it's easy to remove that countershaft sprocket. So now we're going to jump on installing this chain. This particular chain is a 102 links. I'm glad it's longer. I had to cut a few links off. I believe I cut 4 links off of it. The stock 800 SS, I think it called for like a 97 or 96 link chain or something like that. But 102, I guess that's right. I cut off 102, I cut off 4, so I'm at 98 links. 99 if you count the master link. So when you get your chains threaded through there, you want to line it up to where your links are meeting the sprocket, and there's still a little play in the chain because you need to be able to adjust it later. So right now I'm seeing that I need to take off 4 links. And I'm going to use my handy dandy generic chain braking tool. I have a couple of these. A few years ago, 10-15 years ago, I spent $80 on a Motion Pro chain breaker, and I successfully broke a couple of the parts that are on the Motion Pro. And I was out surfing the web one day, and I came across this generic chain breaker kit, and I don't think it was 20 bucks. It is as good, if not better, than the Motion Pro chain breaker. So the tool I just put in there is a punch, and its job is to press a pin out of the link that I want to remove. And what I do is the bigger section of the threaded piece, I put that down so it's sitting almost on top of the pin that goes through the link, and then I run the punch through. So everything you need is in this box. However, I like using a 14mm wrench because I feel I get a better grip on the chain breaker. So the first couple turns are going to be really hard to do. The way the pin is made is it's actually pressed onto each side of the link. But once you get past that part that's pressed onto the link, then the pin will go through pretty quickly. And once you get it all the way through and the pin comes out the other side, then you're done. Your link will come apart. So we're almost there now. You see how easy that wrench is turning. So there's the pin from that link, and then I just back the tool off. So I have to back the tool off, and I have to get that punch out of the tool. So we're done with the punch part. Alright, so now the chain is cut to length. So now we're going to put our tool back together to press the chain together. So we're going to get rid of this and the punch. We'll put it back into our little box. And inside your box there should be two presses. The one that goes on the inside of the bike is going to be smooth with no holes, and the one that's going to be on the outside of the chain is going to have two holes, so your pins come through those two holes when you're pressing on the master link. So this little package comes with just about every new chain you buy. I always buy rivet style links. Rivet style links are a little bit safer if you install them correctly. I have seen the clip style where the clip on the master link pops off and then the outer plate pops off and then the chain comes apart and somebody loses their chain going down the highway. So I always use the rivet style, just mainly for safety. So I put a little bit of that lithium grease on the master link, and I put the O-rings down, and those O-rings are going to hold that lithium grease inside the chain. So I'm putting lithium grease inside the holes in the two links that are going to be connected together, and then I take the master and run it through. When I first started doing chains, I always flipped the master so the rivet would be on the inside, and it's much more difficult to do it that way, but I think it looks cleaner because it makes the bike look like it has a never-ending chain. But now that I'm in my 50s, I find it's just easier to do it by putting the master in from the back through. I'm putting lithium grease on the outside now, and this lithium grease is going to do a couple things. It's going to hold these O-rings into place, and it's also sticky enough that it's going to hold your plate for the master link. It's going to hold that onto the chain. It's, you can't, with your fingers, you can't push that plate onto the rivets. But that white lithium grease has just enough stickiness that it'll hold that plate onto those two pins long enough for you to get your tool on the chain and start tightening it down and pressing that plate onto your master link. Alright, so again with your chain tool, you're going to have your long flat anvil on the back of the chain, and you're going to have the anvil with the two holes in it on the outside of the chain. And then you're just going to grab hold of the handle and take your 14mm wrench and start tightening it down. Do not tighten your master link down to where your rubber gaskets, your O-rings, are popping out. You want to leave, less than a millimeter of space between the inner link and the outer link. Otherwise, you're just going to destroy your chain. So don't push this outer plate too far onto the chain. There is too far. If you've never done this before, do a little bit, back the tool off, check your chain, do a little bit more, back the tool off, check your chain. Whatever you do, don't over tighten your chain link. Okay, now we're going to set the rivet on your chain. So in your chain toolkit, you're going to get a anvil out. The anvil will go into the bottom side, and then you're going to get the rivet. So the rivet just looks like a little beveled edge, like a little hump, and you just drop it in. And what that does is when it lands in the hole of your rivet style link, it'll separate that hole. So it kind of like widens that hole, so you're obviously, so the pin won't come out, or that plate that you just pressed on won't come off. And again, what I do is I tighten down my chain tool so the big portion of it is right over the top of the rivet, and then the piece that sets the rivet just has to drop into that hole. So you just tighten it down, and you're not gonna put 5,000 pounds of pressure on your wrench when you're doing this. You just need to give it enough pressure so it spreads the end of that rivet on the master link, and then back it off and move to the other rivet and set that rivet into place. So at this point, our master link is set, the rivet's in place, and we're ready to go. So everything looks good, just clean it up. that looks nice. Now it's time that we adjust the chain. So we need to get a little bit more slack in the chain than we have here. So I pushed the wheel up just a little bit further, and that gave me a lot of slack. And now I'm going to adjust it back. So my goal is to have the adjuster to be sitting on the very first line on the front of the swing arm. So as you're tightening this, it's a good idea to do both sides about the same to pull the wheel back, and you want to make sure that the lines are in the identical same place on both sides of the swing arm. So you can see that mine is just a little bit back behind the first line. So that's great. That gives me about 2 inches of wear through the life of this chain. But like I said earlier in the video, I usually only get about 15 to 20,000 miles out of a chain before it starts clicking and making noises. So we're going to go ahead and torque down our axle bolt. Again, I don't give torque specifications in my video. That'll be in your owner's manual. This is a little bit dirty, so I cleaned off this cover. Now this cover, it's pretty ugly, the one that Ducati provides you. For about 30 bucks, you can get a carbon fiber cover to replace this gray plastic one. I said I wasn't going to replace anything on this bike with carbon fiber. In the future, I may go ahead and clean this one up and do some like black truck bed liner or something, because I think black looks better than the gray that Ducati uses. And then that case cover that you see with like brown drippings on it, a battery in this bike leaked battery acid down the side of the engine. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that engine case yet, but the cooling fins have some crud on them as well, that from the battery acid bubbling up the paint or powder coating that's on those cooling fins. And again, it destroyed, right there you can see where it destroyed the clutch line. That actually just came in, so I'll be replacing that in the video in the next couple days. So thanks for watching this video. I hope it was informative to you.